Our next volunteers cover a region spanning from Karamea to Fox Glacier along the wild West Coast. Representing the Grey District, we have the West Coast Volunteer Fire Brigade.
We go to bed every night safe and sound, and we take for granted in some ways the fire brigades around the country. In particular, our fire brigade on the West Coast have been through some very trying times over the last few years. We had the normal fires and all the accidents, car accidents, those types of things that fire brigades go out to. But on the West Coast, we have had tornadoes, cyclones, we have also had the Cave Creek disaster, we've also had the Pike River disaster and the Canterbury earthquake, where our men tirelessly helped out over the years. In recent times, and that's last year, we had Cyclone Eta. And Cyclone Eta, we had 520 call-outs to the fire brigades, and that was during the night and the whole next day. It was incredible, the job that they did. I give you our unsung heroes, our West Coast Fire Brigades.
The wild winds have gone, but you can see where they've been. The West Coast still recovering from a battering that lasted for hours.
We think there's around 60 houses that have got no roofs. We want them to be watertight as quickly as possible.
For some, it's too late. Already demolished the 91-year-old Blaketown Municipal Band Hall.
It wasn't like one big gust of wind. It kept working on it for hours and hours and hours, and gradually peeled the iron up and peeled it off.
Richard's own 100-year-old cottage refused to yield. This is Blaketown. Just over the way is Cobden, and in between is an enhanced wind zone. Now, at its peak, it was gusting over 45 metres per second, or over 145 kilometres per hour, the scale of which has never been seen before. It's being described already as a 1 in 500-year event. The spray-painted rescue markings resemble post-quake Christchurch. Mayor Tony Cockshawn hopes that's where the similarities end.
Afternoon, I'm Mark Bohr. I'm the Area Commander for the New Zealand Fire Service on the West Coast. I'm certainly honoured to have a huge amount of volunteers who are in my, I'd say, employ. That's probably not the right word. But certainly the fire brigades that we have are established by communities who recognised the need to protect the people in their residences and their commercial and industrial activities. Unfortunately, many were also born out of the tragedies that occurred for their communities. West Coast Fire Brigades have been involved in some of the most significant events both in local and New Zealand history. As Tony mentioned, from fires, we've gone on to floods, tornadoes, storms. We attend motor vehicle accidents with regularity. We've gone to major aircraft crashes. We've been to Cave Creek, Pike River and the Christchurch earthquake. In many of these cases, volunteers were the first on the scene. And as they were in Cyclone Eta, where the volunteers attended well in excess of 400 calls made by 111 system, and on top of that, well over 1,000 other properties over the 2 days that they were there to help their communities.
Hello everyone, I'm Gavin Skeets, Deputy Chief Fire Officer of the Cobden Volunteer Fire Brigade on the West Coast. My role was that of volunteer officer in charge of one of the fire trucks during the Cyclone Eta, and I'm very proud to be here representing all of the West Coast's 21 volunteer fire brigades, and for the opportunity to give you an insight into the challenging work our brigades carried out during Cyclone Eta. The volunteer brigades became the lead agency to plan, coordinate, deliver the emergency help that was required on the day of the cyclone and the ever-important following day. They worked in relative isolation as roads were closed by debris. They had to work with what they had and do the very best they could, knowing that help would not come for some time. The day of the cyclone and the following day, crews worked between 12 to 14-hour days carrying out all manner of rescue work, welfare checks, medical assistance calls and firefighting duties, with members initially unable to check their own families as power and phone systems were overloaded, which was pretty tough. After dealing with everything from down power poles, flying trampolines, overturned vehicles, etc., the crew that I was working with responded to a call to a young mum in distress. This poor girl was terrified. Her house roof had blown off and all the windows were blown in. So in 100k plus winds, we loaded the 2 toddlers, a 3.5-week-old infant and the mum into our fire truck. We evacuated them to the safety of the local vicarage. About half an hour later, we heard on the radio that everyone had to be evacuated from the vicarage as the roof had been blown off that. All we could think of was that poor young family. Another chilling call we responded to was to a young mum with a 2-year-old, frightened out of her wits. The lounge windows had blown in and a tree had smashed onto the house. We nailed the lounge door shut, which was all we could do, and her partner was on his way home, so we got back into our fire truck, only to have the front windscreen broken from a wind gust. Then we looked out to the poor young mum's house we'd just been in. It lost its entire roof, including the trusses, all blown about 40 metres up behind her house. We left a note for her partner, loaded her and her daughter onto the fire truck and evacuated the 2 of them to our fire station, where we administered oxygen therapy to calm her panic attack, which was understandable considering what she'd just endured. I think we all could have done with some oxygen. We responded to a call to an elderly gentleman who was too frightened to leave his house. And as we approached his address, we noticed that the chimney was lying bent over on the roof, but there was still smoke coming out of it, and there was smoke coming out of the ceiling area as well. As we got out of the truck, one of the truck doors was wrenched around by the wind, damaging it quite bad. We could hardly stand up. The old fellow was in a bad state. We spent some time calming him down, and the crew extinguished the fire in his log burner. They made sure that there was no sign of fire in the ceiling cavity. Then we took him, his cat, and his medication, took him next door to the safety of his neighbours. When lack of light made things too dangerous to continue, trucks were repacked, gear was cleaned, and crews were stood down for the day. They were sent home to rest, but upon returning home after putting in such a huge day, many firefighters were faced with badly damaged houses of their own, greeted by upset family members, and knowing that they had to report back to the station at daybreak for another full-on day of providing assistance to the community where required. Well, that was just a few of the examples of what went on for us during that day, but every West Coast Volunteer Fire Brigade was dealing with very similar emergencies all day in their respective areas with no let-up. Many volunteers helped out for days and even weeks after the event, asking for nothing in return, but just happy to help out where help was needed. The benefits to the coast communities and businesses from the volunteers' actions during and after the cyclone go without saying. I can't imagine how dire things may have been if it wasn't for the passion, the resilience, the integrity and the dedication of all the West Coast Volunteer Fire Brigades. And it's important to remember this voluntary service is given 24 hours a day, every day, whatever the weather, and no matter what the emergency. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.